With Richard Kenney. He's a professor of English at the University of Washington. His works include The Evolution of the Flightless Bird, Orrery, and the Invention of the Zero. Kenney is the recipient of numerous accolades, including the Yale Younger Poets Prize, the Lannan Literary Award, and the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation Fellowship. His most recent book is The One Strand River.
Well, my name is Richard Kenney, and I've been here for the year at the Writers' Workshop, and what I'm going to talk about is meter. I'm going to talk about fundamentals here. Meter means measure, which implies counting, and numbers. In fact, poetry used to be called numbers. Well, how many? Well, let me think. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is my poetic line. So we will measure it as the poets do. We have 5 numbers, 6, as many as we need, I suppose. What gets counted? Well, you could count anything, I suppose. Anything that you could whistle back for in a repetitive way, so that you had a symmetrical pattern, a noticeable pattern. You could count unicorns. 5 unicorns in a single poetic line would well, you see the problem. It would be sentimentality would be the least of it. What you really want to count are small things that don't have any meaning, like syllables. You know where this is going. Syllables are one of the things that famously get counted in meter. What else? Well, accents or stresses, as we know, get counted. So there are syllabic meters and there are stress meters. And then the third thing, which is the confluence of those two traditions, and constitutes the great metrical tradition in English, is counting both at once, which means counting feet. But what I'm going to do is illustrate how one would make a line out of those simple elements. And to do that, like I said, I have props. We'll do syllabics first. Now, these represent syllables. I have enough. Now, the simplest syllabic form, the one that everybody's familiar with, are haiku poems, right? Turnip farmer rose, and with a fresh pulled turnip pointed to my road. So we have turnip farmer rose, and with a fresh pulled turnip, 7, pointed to my road. 5, 7, 5. Easy. In the stress tradition, we have the Anglo-Saxons, at the very root of English literature, began English literature, wrote in stress meters. I can't speak that for you, but during the Middle English period, the alliterative revival, there was a poet called the Pearl Poet who wrote Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, which begins, Sithen the sage and the south was Caesar at Troia, the Bork, Britain and Brent to Brondus and Ascus. That's close. You can hear bang, 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 bang. There are 5 of those, 5 stresses in each line. We're going to use bolts for that. I said I wouldn't use that word, but there it is. It's 5 for the English tradition. So, Sithen the sage and the south was Caesar at Troia, the Bork was Britain and Brent to Brondus and Ascus. Okay, can you see these better if I turn them? 5 stresses. That tradition survives, comes down to us in the nursery rhyme tradition. So, hinks, minks, the old witch winks, the beggars are coming to town, some in rags and some in tags and one in a velvet gown. So, now we have hinks, minks, the old witch winks, the beggars are coming to town. The beggars are coming to town, some in rags and some in tags, and one in a velvet gown. And there you see a very famous rhythmic pattern in the literature. It's the song measure. It's, in this case, 4 stresses and then 3 and then 4 and then 3. It can be done, and all of them, hey diddle diddle, the cat and the fiddle, the cow jumped over the moon, or one of my favorites, bow wow wow, whose dog art thou, little Tom Tinker's dog, bow wow wow. No, bow wow wow, it's not very hard. It can be done in more complicated fashion. Manley Hopkins is famous for it. The Kingfisher begins, his poem, The Kingfisher, begins, as kingfishers catch fire, dragonflies draw flame. As tumbled over rim and roundy well stones ring, so each tucked string tells, each hung bell's bow swung finds tongue to fling out broad its name. And Hopkins is counting stresses, and these are accents which fall on particular syllables in the course of a sentence. No syllables. You notice I'm not counting any syllables at all. They don't figure at all in this system. So the line "Hinks, minks, the old witch blinks" is the same length as a line which would begin, let me tell you a little story about a boy named Herb. His daddy was a noun and his mama was a verb. That follows the pattern as a lot of songs do. They don't need to count their syllables. They don't lose track of where they are. They know how many stresses there are because in the Anglo-Saxon tradition they would alliterate them. In music, you strum the banjo, and the music carries it. But that's the alliterative tradition, and you're welcome to try it. It's a powerful way of writing, and the limitation here is not that you can't hear it, but you sometimes have trouble deciding where the stresses fall in long lines. Now we come to the great tradition, as I said, the Accentual syllabic tradition, where I said you count both. Well, how do you do two things at once? The obvious way to do it is to combine them, and that's where my props come in. So a stress will be coupled with a number of unstressed syllables, and you call that grouping a foot. In English, there are really just two rhythms that we're trying to approximate. And a rhythm would be a repetitive pattern of a stress followed by some number of unstressed syllables, which is always the same, so that it would sound symmetrical. So, and in English, there are really just four of these. There are two rhythms. One is the heartbeat, lub-dub, 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 dub-lub, dub-lub. This one, I'm going to couple them together. When I do that, what I have is a trochee from your position. The bolt and the nut. There's two rhythms that we try to approximate using these feet. One is the double rhythm, and that's the rhythm of the heartbeat. It's an easy way to remember it. The heart goes, let's say the heart goes lub-dub, lub-dub, lub-dub. It goes unstress, stress. So I have just made an iamb here with the unstressed syllable, which is the nut, followed by the bolt, lub-dub. Now, in a long string, if I say lub-dub, 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 and I ask Chris back there, somebody else, I don't remember where I started. Did I start on a lub or a dub? He would shrug and say, why does it matter? And this is the difference, the distinction between a trochee and an iamb is really minimal. They're both trying to approximate this rhythm, which is propagates all the way through the literature. Now, the other rhythm that the poetic feet try to approximate is the triple rhythm. It's called a triple because there are three syllables in it. Two of them are unstressed. Here's a second, add this. Now, instead of lub-dub, I have diddy-dum, diddy-dum, diddy-dum. And these can be strung together, and in nursery rhymes, hey diddle diddle, a cat and a fiddle has a bunch of them, a bunch of these in it. The literature also, particularly in former centuries, uses these feet. They're called anapests and dactyls. The anapest rises up to the stress, and the dactyl falls down from it. The dactyl and the trochee are the falling feet. Bump bump or bump bump bump, and the anapest and the iamb are the double and the triple rising feet. And out of these props, you can build a poem. There are two measures which are common. One is the pentameter line, the long line, which sounds like speech, and the other is the short line, or the song measure. Many songs are in it, and many serious poems too. Okay, so this goes, shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more lovely and more temperate. All right, that works. I'm tired of love. I'm still more tired of rhyme, but money gives me pleasure all the time. That works. The opening lines of Keats's famous odes. Thou still unravished bride of quietness, thou foster child of silence and slow time. Excuse me? That sounded really foolish, and that's sort of the point of these meters. The meter is purely mechanical, and it isn't a feeling creature. It's really a robotic sort of mechanical thing made out of nuts and bolts like this. It only knows stressed syllables and unstressed syllables. And for this reason, it's really important to understand that when we say stress in the context of accentual syllabic meters, what we're talking about is the stress with illicit stress or allowable stresses within a single word. So if a word accepts a stress, if a syllable in a word accepts a stress, if the dictionary says it accepts a stress, primary or secondary, doesn't matter. It just gets a stress as far as the meter's concerned. But you, feeling creature that you are, will not read it foolishly like that in a sing-song fashion. You will read it naturally. And so if I read that Shakespearean line again and say, shall I won't, my robot reads it, shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Well, I would say, shall I compare thee to a summer's day? And how many stresses is that? Well, the number of stresses of actual stresses that I give it is 4. So the robot reads it relentlessly and ruthlessly, giving the same amount of stress to each of the stressable syllables. The prepositions, the conjunctions get as much juice as the nouns and the verbs. They get as much stress as anything that one would wish to emphasize. When one read it in a dramatic fashion. So an actor can read a line differently one day, different from another day, differently on Thursday than he does on Tuesday. The meter never changes. The meter is always ticking along underneath the surface, simply striking every allowable syllable, every syllable in which the dictionary permit a stress. Whereas you'll read it normally. So in a line like that, shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? We have four rhetorical stresses, 4 voice stresses or rhythmic stresses, we would say, but there are 5 metrical stresses. Don't worry about it. And this happens in many, many lines. Any line that has a conjunction or a preposition or some grammatical word like that will often have fewer stresses than 5 rhythmic stresses. The meter goes along underneath the surface without any problem. And that's just about the whole story, really. I could illustrate with 4-beat lines. I could illustrate with 5-beat lines. But just to do a couple more, the opening lines of Keats's. I'll do 2 of the odes. The ode in the Grecian urn begins, "Thou still unravished bride of quietness, thou foster child of silence and slow time, Sylvan historian, who canst thus express a flowery tale more sweetly than our rhyme." Now, if you want to hear the robot read that, metrically, it would go like this. "Thou still unravished bride of quietness, thou foster child of silence and slow time." It sounds idiotic to put an accent on "and." One wants to accent slow and time. Thou foster child of silence, slow time. It's a beautiful line. Well, that disjunction, that disharmony, that counterpointing effect is really what makes accentual syllabic poetry so thrilling, because the part of your body adjusts itself, your physical nature adjusts itself to the clock of the meter and expects these stresses to come. And when they don't come, there's a little bit of a frisson, a little bit of your hair goes up on your neck a little bit sometimes. You got to have a physical response. The there's one other version of that. The next line is Sylvan historian who can thus express. Now Sylvan can't be pronounced Sylvan, but the robot wants to go Sylvan historian who can thus express. Can't do it. So what do? Well, it's really easy. You just flip the iamb around into a trochee. Now we have a trochee. Sylvan. And now we revert to iambs, historian who can thus express. And this happens all the time. It happens very often in the first position of a poetic line. The opening of the Ode to Autumn is season of mists and mellow fruitfulness, close bosom friend to the maturing sun. Well, you know, you could imagine that that was made out of trochees because it starts with season. And season can't be pronounced season. Now, my robot wants to say season of mists and mellow fruitfulness, but I can't. So I turn the iamb around, make a trochee of it, and I go season, and then I revert to iambs of mists and mellow fruitfulness. And now we're done. And it's okay. Everything works out. If I were to take more time, I won't. You should. You read the great poems, and you'll find these effects happening all the time. In the context of this little chat, I'm saying don't worry about it. It's okay. If the meter gets violated occasionally, it's fine as long as you revert to the pattern. And again, the pattern doesn't have to be the way that one would actually say the line. The syllables, where accents are supposed to strike, as in the case of 5 of them in a pentameter line, they simply have to be able to accept a stress. So with these props, I've been trying to show how the armature can be laid out for a metrical line. What you have to do, but how does one write one? One simply speaks and moves syllables around so that they can fit the pattern. And if you just have to say something and it doesn't quite fit the pattern, don't worry about it as long as you recover and return to the pattern. Is it possible to write this way and sound anything like a normal human being? Will it necessarily sound like some sort of faux Shakespearean? No, it isn't very difficult at all to do this day and night. The fact is I could speak that way for a long time without you noticing. I guess I'll say one last thing. These meters don't exist in the world. They exist in your nervous system. And I'll demonstrate that. I propose that there are 2 rhythms, the heartbeat and the hoofbeat. I will propose that of all the possible meters, and if you say that there are 6, there are dimeters, trimeters, tetrameters, pentameters, and hexameters, and there are anapes, dactyls, iambs, and trochees. That should be 24 meters that you'd have to memorize. It's not that way. There are really only a few that actually happen, and they are the lines, the meter which resembles song, and that's called the song measure or ballad measure, and that's some combination of 4 feet and 3 feet. And Hinks Minks works that way, Betsy from Pike works that way, Clementine works that way, the Yellow Rose from Texas works that way, Tiger Burning Bright in the Forest of the Night. Many poems work that way. All the Christmas carols you know, all of the ballads you know, work that way. There's some combination of 4 stresses and 3 stresses, 4 stresses and 3 stresses. 4, 4, 4, 4, something like that. The other famous line is the line which approximates speech, and in English that's the pentameter line, and this is the nature of poetry. Its DNA is the twining of the strands of song and speech, speech which resembles song, song which resembles speech, and those are the two principal measures or line lengths: the short line, and the long line. And the 2 rhythms are the heartbeat and the hoofbeat. And the hoofbeat is really only used nowadays for, it's used principally in light verse, the humorous verse. But I started to say that the meters exist. They're often talked about as though they're in the world, but they're really just ways of talking about things that happen in the world, which are strings of rhythmic patterns which appear in speech. And so the line, shall I compare thee to a summer's day? A pentameter line, is it really? Well, in the context, if the next line is "Thou art more lovely and more temperate," and the poem can "Rough winds do shake the darling buds of May," yes, it's a pentameter line. But if that poem were to have continued, let's say, "Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art too prim and arch, more like February, say, complaining into March." Okay, now we have, "Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? No, thou art too prim and arch, 4-3, more like February, say, complaining into March." Now I've made a little ballad out of that. Does that mean that this ballad measure has one pentameter line? No, it just has a stressed tetrameter line that just has a few extra syllables in it. What I'm trying to propose is that I began with counting and numbers, just like professors always do, and it's not about numbers and counting at all. It's that's just the mind trying to understand it at a level of detail which is in practice all but irrelevant. The truth is these things are biological effects. They happen in the body, and music is the proof of that. If you find yourself moving to music, then you know that this happens in a very unmediated kind of way. I left the question of the journalist's questions, who, what, when, where, why, how. I tried to concentrate a little bit on what and how, but the who, where, when, everybody, always. And that's who and when. There's no, it's a cultural universal. The anthropologists haven't found a culture where this doesn't exist. One presumes it, probably there are bone flutes that go back to the caves. One presumes that this kind of thing was going on from the beginning. It's everywhere. Where it's not only in poetry. It's in fact over the last century, metrical verse having dominated the tradition. And probably all of the Western poetic traditions anyway, the only ones I know anything about since the beginning. In the last century, meter took a back seat to some other poetic effects, but the advertisers and the agitprop shamans didn't leave it behind. We hear metrical constructions probably more often in advertising than at least average people out there on the street. Probably hear them in that context, in the context of music, more often than they do in the context of poetry. Why? Well, the advertisers know that it kind of gets people's attention. The music people know that, well, we're all drinking wine, aren't we? Why wouldn't we want to be here? We like it. You know, you sometimes hear that meter is used because meter was a technology or a method which enhanced memory. Okay, it's not untrue. It's true. It strikes me it's true in the same sense that groceries enhance digestion. Because we're inclined to. The answer is the same as for music. Why? Because we like it. It's pleasing to us, both in the hearing and in the composition. I guess that's it.